Ms. Johnson had always been a woman who valued the simple pleasures in life. One of her favorite routines was visiting the upscale restaurant in town. Every month, she would treat herself to a nice meal, enjoying the atmosphere, the fine dining, and the calm that only a lovely restaurant could provide. Today was no different. Dressed neatly in a bright blue dress, her hair elegantly styled, she entered the restaurant with a smile on her face. She had looked forward to this meal all week. As she stepped inside, the restaurant was bustling with energy. The low hum of quiet conversations and the soft clink of glasses filled the air. The elegant chandeliers above reflected the soft golden light, creating a warm and inviting environment. Ms. Johnson had always admired how the restaurant managed to make even the busiest of times feel peaceful. The host, a young man in a black suit, smiled politely and approached her. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I assist you today?" he asked in a friendly tone. Ms. Johnson smiled back, appreciating the warm welcome. "Hello, dear. I don't have a reservation, but I would love to have a table for one. It's been a long week, and I thought I'd treat myself." The host checked the reservation list quickly. "I see we have a few tables open, but they are mostly reserved for later. Would you mind waiting for just a few minutes? We can get you seated shortly." "Of course," she replied gently, happy to wait. She stood by the entrance, admiring the decor and taking in the atmosphere while a few other patrons passed by. Everything seemed normal, calm, and pleasant. She couldn't wait to sit down and enjoy her meal. As she waited, she noticed a waiter walking past her. His name tag read Mark, and he looked like he had been working at the restaurant for some time. Ms. Johnson noticed how he quickly glanced at her and then seemed to dismiss her with a look. There was something in the way he carried himself, almost as if he didn't want to be bothered. She thought nothing of it, but it left a small feeling in her chest. Still, she brushed it off, figuring maybe it was just her imagination. The host finally came back to her. "Ma'am, we have a table ready for you now. If you please follow me," he said. Ms. Johnson nodded and followed the host to her table, appreciating his courtesy. The table was near the window, with a lovely view of the city streets below. She sat down comfortably and set her purse next to her. The warm glow of the restaurant made everything feel inviting, and Ms. Johnson was eager to begin looking through the menu. But as she opened the menu and started to browse through the options, she couldn't help but notice Mark standing by the entrance, glancing over at her with what appeared to be an impatient look. It was strange. She felt his eyes on her, but there was something off in the way he was watching her. Moments later, Mark walked over to her table. He was polite at first, but there was a coldness in his tone that she hadn't expected. "I'm afraid we're really busy tonight, ma'am. You may want to try another restaurant. We might not have room for you." Ms. Johnson was taken aback. The disrespect in his voice caught her off guard. "I've been coming here for years," she replied softly, trying to maintain her calm. "I just wanted a nice meal." Mark didn't seem to listen. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't accommodate you right now," he said quickly, turning as if he had already made up his mind. There was no room for discussion. Confused and a bit hurt, Ms. Johnson sat there in disbelief. She looked around, wondering if anyone else had noticed what had just happened, but no one seemed to pay attention. Ms. Johnson sat in her chair, staring at the waiter, Mark, as he walked away. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had always been a regular at this restaurant, and the thought that she was being turned away because of her age or appearance never crossed her mind. She had always felt welcome, always treated with kindness. But now, sitting there alone at the table, she couldn't help but feel a pang of hurt. What had gone wrong? She glanced around the room, trying to gauge if anyone else had noticed the interaction. The restaurant, which had always felt warm and inviting, suddenly seemed colder. The other diners were enjoying their meals, oblivious to the small but significant moment that had just taken place. Ms. Johnson sighed and reached for her phone in her purse. She thought about calling her son, Elijah, but she hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to trouble him with something like this, especially when it seemed so trivial. But then, a deeper sense of frustration began to settle in. This wasn't just about the meal. It was about respect. She had earned that respect over years of being a loyal customer. Taking a deep breath, she decided to call Elijah anyway. After a few rings, her son's voice came through the phone. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Hi, Elijah." Ms. Johnson replied, her voice soft but tinged with a hint of unease. "I'm at the restaurant, and, well, something strange just happened." She paused, unsure of how to explain. "The waiter, Mark, refused to serve me. He said the restaurant was too busy, but it didn't feel right." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Elijah spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Mom, stay right where you are. I'm coming to the restaurant. Just wait for me." Ms. Johnson felt a sense of relief wash over her. Elijah always had a way of handling things, and she knew he would take care of it. She sat back in her chair, trying to relax. Her son was coming, and everything would be okay. But the feeling of being dismissed, of being treated as if she didn't matter, still lingered. It wasn't just about the food. It was about how she had been made to feel small, invisible. She had raised Elijah to understand the importance of kindness, respect, and fairness. But now, here she was, in need of those very things. As she waited, her eyes wandered back to the restaurant staff. She noticed how some of them exchanged glances, perhaps gossiping about her or wondering why she hadn't left yet. Ms. Johnson wondered if they would have acted differently had they known who she was. Did they treat her this way because of her appearance, or because they thought she was just another lonely old woman? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Elijah walked in, his tall figure easily recognizable. He looked around the restaurant until his eyes landed on her. He gave her a reassuring smile and walked over to her table. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, sitting down beside her. "I'm going to handle this." Ms. Johnson didn't say anything, but she felt a small wave of comfort at his presence. She had raised him well. He understood the value of standing up for what was right. The hurt was still there, but with Elijah at her side, she knew things would change. The respect that had been denied her would soon be restored. As Elijah sat down beside his mother, he could see the disappointment in her eyes. She had always been a woman of grace, someone who held her head high in any situation. But today was different. He could tell this had hurt her deeply. While he could feel his own frustration building, he kept his voice calm and reassuring. He needed to handle this situation with care and dignity, just like his mother had taught him all these years. "I'm going to take care of this, Mom," he said softly, squeezing her hand. She nodded, her eyes still downcast, but there was a hint of relief in the way she exhaled. Elijah stood up and turned to the manager, who was standing near the back of the room, nervously watching the situation unfold. The manager had clearly noticed the tension in the air, but hadn't yet stepped in to address it. Elijah walked with purpose toward the manager, his footsteps steady but deliberate. He could feel the eyes of the restaurant staff on him, but he didn't let it rattle him. He had a mission: to right this wrong and make sure his mother was treated with the respect she deserved. The manager looked up, trying to put on a friendly face, but Elijah could see the unease in his expression. "Can I help you, sir?" the manager asked, trying to sound casual, but the tone was tight, as if he was already preparing for the worst. Elijah took a deep breath before speaking, keeping his voice even but firm. "Yes, actually. I'd like to speak to you about an issue with one of your staff members." The manager nodded, clearly trying to prepare for whatever Elijah was about to say. "I'm Elijah," he continued, "and I own this restaurant. I'm sure you've heard of me before." The manager's face went pale at the mention of Elijah's name. He had no idea that Ms. Johnson was the mother of the owner, and it was clear from his reaction that he hadn't expected this conversation to go in this direction. "I'm not sure what happened," Elijah said, "but my mother is a loyal customer here. She's been coming for years, and to treat her in that way is unacceptable." The manager opened his mouth to speak, but Elijah held up a hand to stop him. I don't want to hear excuses. I want to make it clear that no one, should ever feel unwelcome in this place." The manager stood there for a moment, his face filled with regret. He realized, too late, the mistake he had made. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know. I had no idea." He trailed off, unable to find the right words. Elijah's presence was undeniable, and the power of his calm but direct approach was already having an effect. "I don't want to hear, 'I didn't know,'" Elijah said firmly. "This is about respect. Every customer should be treated with dignity, no matter who they are, whether you know who they are or not." He paused, giving the manager a chance to process his words. "Now, I'm going to need you to take immediate action. We can't have this kind of behavior going on in my restaurant." Elijah turned and motioned for the manager to follow him. They both walked back toward the dining area, where Ms. Johnson was still seated. The staff watched curiously, unsure of what was going to happen next. As they reached Ms. Johnson's table, Elijah addressed the waiter, Mark, who was standing awkwardly near the entrance, looking uncomfortable. "Mark," Elijah said, his tone cool, "I think it's best if you leave for the day. We'll handle this from here." Mark's face flushed with embarrassment as he realized what was happening. He opened his mouth to say something, but Elijah's gaze stopped him. There was no need for words now. The restaurant was silent, and all eyes were on the unfolding scene. Elijah turned to the other staff members who were watching, his voice calm but commanding. "We all work hard to create an atmosphere of warmth and respect here. Treating anyone with disrespect, especially someone who has been coming here for years, is not how we operate." Ms. Johnson, sitting quietly at her table, watched her son with a sense of pride. She had always known that he was a man of integrity, but seeing him handle this situation with such poise and strength brought a sense of peace to her heart. Elijah was not just her son. He was a leader, a man who would stand up for what was right, no matter the circumstance. The restaurant had fallen silent, and all eyes were on Elijah as he stood at the front of the room, speaking with calm authority. Ms. Johnson sat quietly at her table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She could feel the weight of the moment, the air thick with anticipation, as if everyone in the room was waiting for something to change. And change it did, but not in the way she had expected. After Elijah asked Mark to leave, the waiter hesitated for a moment, looking unsure of how to react. He hadn't expected this. He had assumed that his actions would go unnoticed. But now, with the owner standing before him, the truth was clear. Mark was caught in his own mistake, and it was something he couldn't ignore. Ms. Johnson watched as Mark, looking uncomfortable, walked to the back of the restaurant. His steps were slow, and there was no pride in his stride. The staff continued to watch, but no one moved. The atmosphere had changed from one of casual business to something far more intense. Elijah had made it clear that this would not be tolerated, but now Ms. Johnson could see a subtle shift in the way the other employees looked at each other. They knew the lines had been crossed, and it was no longer about just one person's mistake. It was about the culture of the entire restaurant. As Mark disappeared from view, Elijah turned to the manager, who was now standing by nervously. "You'll need to speak with the rest of the staff," he said, his voice steady but firm. "This kind of behavior cannot continue. I expect a full review of your team's conduct, and we will be discussing this at length." The manager nodded quickly, understanding the seriousness of the situation. "Yes, Mr. Elijah," he replied, his voice shaky but trying to regain some composure. "We'll address it immediately. I assure you, this won't happen again." With a nod of approval, Elijah turned back to his mother, who had remained calm throughout the entire ordeal. He could see the appreciation in her eyes, though she didn't say anything at first. Her quiet strength was something he had always admired. She was the one who had taught him the importance of dignity. And now, here she was, showing him the same quiet resolve. Elijah pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, giving her a small smile. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Mom," he said softly, his voice full of sincerity. "I should have been here sooner." Ms. Johnson shook her head gently, her lips curving into a small smile. "It's not your fault, Elijah. It's just that sometimes people forget what it means to show kindness and respect." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "I've been through so much in my life, but I've never asked for anything more than the simple decency of being treated well. I guess that's why this hurts so much." Elijah nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I know, Mom. I get it now. And that's why I'll make sure this place is run the way it should be. Everyone who walks through that door will be treated the way they deserve, no exceptions." Ms. Johnson's eyes softened, her heart swelling with pride. She had raised Elijah to understand the importance of standing up for what was right, no matter who was involved. Now, watching him handle the situation with such grace, she knew that he had learned those lessons well. At that moment, the restaurant felt different. The once tense atmosphere began to shift, and the noise of conversation slowly resumed. The staff members went back to their work, though there was a noticeable change in the way they moved. There was a sense of humility among them, as if they understood that something important had just taken place. Elijah had made it clear that respect wasn't just about appearances or titles. It was about treating people with dignity, no matter who they were. As the meal went on, Elijah and Ms. Johnson enjoyed their time together, with no further interruptions. The rest of the evening passed peacefully, but for Elijah, it wasn't just about the meal. It was about what he had learned. The importance of standing up for people when they need it most. The importance of doing what was right, even when it wasn't easy. And most importantly, the importance of respect. As the evening continued, the atmosphere in the restaurant had noticeably shifted. The tension that had hung in the air like a thick fog began to lift, replaced by a sense of relief and quiet understanding. The staff, still processing what had just occurred, went about their tasks with a bit more care, a bit more attentiveness. The hum of conversations around the room resumed, but now there was a different tone to it, a quiet acknowledgement that something significant had happened. Elijah remained at his mother's side, making sure she felt comfortable. He ordered a glass of wine for both of them, wanting to ensure that the evening, despite the earlier disruption, would still be something they could both enjoy. Ms. Johnson, although still processing the events, appreciated the small gestures. She had raised Elijah to be strong, but he had always been thoughtful. Now, as she looked at him sitting across from her, she could see that he had grown into a man who not only understood the importance of respect, but also knew how to take action when it was needed most. The manager, after speaking with the rest of the staff, approached Elijah and Ms. Johnson's table. His face was serious, but there was a hint of relief in his expression now. He had taken the time to speak to each member of the staff, reminding them of the restaurant's values and the importance of treating all customers with the utmost respect. Elijah had made it clear earlier that this was not a one-time mistake. It was a reflection of a bigger issue that needed to be addressed, and the manager had understood that. "I want to apologize once more," the manager said, his voice sincere. "I spoke with the staff about the importance of professionalism, and we are all committed to ensuring that this kind of behavior doesn't happen again. I've also spoken to Mark. He's taking some time off to reflect on how we do things here." The manager paused before adding, "I hope you'll give us another chance." Elijah nodded, his expression calm but firm. "I appreciate you taking the time to address it. I want to see the restaurant thrive, and that means making sure everyone who walks in here feels welcome, no matter who they are." He gave a small smile. "I'm confident this will be a learning experience for all of us." Ms. Johnson watched the exchange quietly, content with how her son had handled everything. She had known Elijah would do the right thing, but seeing it unfold in front of her was a reminder of just how far he had come. It wasn't just about managing a restaurant. It was about leading by example, about instilling a culture of kindness, fairness, and respect. The manager gave a nod of understanding before stepping away, returning to his duties. The restaurant, once again, felt like the place it had always been, a place where people could enjoy a meal, share a conversation, and feel valued. Elijah and Ms. Johnson continued their meal, enjoying the quiet comfort of each other's company. As the night went on, the small moment of tension from earlier faded into the background, replaced by a renewed sense of peace. But for Elijah, the night wasn't just about restoring peace in the restaurant. It was about understanding the true power of his actions. It wasn't enough to simply run a business or take care of day-to-day tasks. What truly mattered was the way people felt when they entered the space. His mother had taught him that the most important thing he could give anyone was respect. It was a lesson that he now carried forward not just in his business, but in every part of his life. As the evening came to an end, Elijah paid the bill and stood up to leave, helping his mother with her coat. The meal had been a reminder for both of them, not only of how far Elijah had come, but of the values that had shaped him into the man he was today. They left the restaurant together, stepping into the cool night air, feeling the weight of the day lift as they walked side by side. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that the right thing had been done filled the space between them. And in the back of their minds, they both knew that the events of the evening would leave an impact, not just on the restaurant, but on everyone who worked there. The lesson of respect was one that would linger long after they had gone. The next few days passed quietly, but Elijah couldn't shake the events of the previous evening from his mind. He spent a lot of time thinking about how everything had unfolded, the initial misunderstanding, his decision to step in, and the way the staff had reacted. While the restaurant was back to its usual rhythm, Elijah knew something had changed. It wasn't just about firing a waiter or making an apology. The incident had revealed something deeper, something that needed to be addressed for the long-term success of his business. As soon as he arrived at the restaurant the next morning, Elijah called a meeting with the entire staff. He knew that this conversation couldn't wait. It wasn't just about making sure something like that didn't happen again. It was about setting a tone for the restaurant. It was about creating an environment where every customer felt welcome, no matter who they were or what they looked like. It wasn't just about serving food. It was about treating people with dignity and respect. Elijah stood at the front of the meeting room, looking around at the familiar faces of his employees. Some of them seemed a little nervous, others simply avoided eye contact. But Elijah wasn't angry. He wasn't there to yell or make anyone feel bad. He was there to make sure the restaurant would continue to be a place where everyone, no matter their background, could come in and enjoy a meal without feeling judged or unwelcome. I know everyone is still processing what happened with my mother the other night, Elijah began, his voice calm but firm. I want to make it clear that what occurred was not acceptable. But more than that, it's an opportunity for us to learn and grow. He paused, letting his words settle in the room. This restaurant is not just a business. It's a place where people come to feel special. Every guest that walks through those doors should feel valued. It doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, or how much money they have. They should feel like they matter. And that starts with all of us. The room was quiet for a moment. Elijah could tell that his words were sinking in. He could see the staff looking at each other, a few exchanging nods. Some were reflecting on what had happened, while others were already thinking about how they could improve. Elijah continued, I know this isn't something we've always done perfectly, but we have to make sure we treat every single person who comes in here with respect, no exceptions. If we do that, the rest will follow. The service will be better, the atmosphere will be better, and most importantly, we will feel better about the work we do. The staff members nodded, and Elijah could tell they were starting to understand the importance of what he was saying. This wasn't just about avoiding one bad situation. It was about building something stronger, something that would last. A restaurant with a reputation for kindness, where people didn't just come to eat, but to feel part of something bigger. I've spoken to Mark, Elijah added. He's taking some time off to reflect on his actions, but that doesn't mean the rest of us are exempt from taking responsibility for what happened. We all need to be more mindful of how we treat others. The manager, who had been standing at the back of the room, spoke up. "I've already spoken to the team about improving our interactions with customers. We'll be doing a better job of training, especially when it comes to recognizing and addressing any biases we may have." Elijah gave a small smile. "That's exactly what I want to hear. We are all a team, and when we work together to make things better, everyone benefits." By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted. The staff was no longer just worried about the fallout from the incident. They were now invested in making the restaurant a better place, both for themselves and for the customers they served. They were beginning to understand that respect wasn't just a policy, it was a mindset that had to be lived out every day, in every interaction. As the meeting wrapped up, Elijah felt a sense of accomplishment. He knew that the changes wouldn't happen overnight, but he was confident that they were on the right path. The road ahead would require constant attention and effort, but he was ready to lead his team with the same principles of fairness and kindness that had always been at the core of his family's values. Later that day, Elijah and Ms. Johnson spoke on the phone. She was grateful for everything he had done, but most of all, she was proud of the way he had handled the situation. "You did the right thing, Elijah," she said, her voice warm. "You've always known the importance of doing what's right, and I'm glad you're continuing to lead by example." Elijah smiled. "Thanks, Mom. It's just about doing the right thing always." He paused for a moment, then added, "I think the restaurant is going to be better for it." And in the weeks that followed, the restaurant did improve. Word got out that it wasn't just about great food. It was about a place where people could come in and feel respected. Elijah's leadership had turned a difficult situation into a lesson that would shape the future of the restaurant. The guests who returned saw a difference in the way they were treated, and it didn't take long for the restaurant's reputation to grow even stronger. In the weeks that followed, the restaurant gradually became more than just a place to dine. It transformed into a space where people felt truly valued. The changes Elijah had implemented didn't happen overnight, but little by little, the staff embraced the new culture. They were no longer just employees. They were ambassadors of respect and kindness. Each person in the restaurant, from the wait staff to the chefs in the back, began to understand how much their actions could affect a guest's experience. Elijah made sure to follow through on his promise to continually improve. He introduced monthly team-building exercises focused on empathy and customer care. He even had a few guest speakers come in to talk about the importance of inclusive environments. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when the challenges felt overwhelming. Some staff members struggled with the change, but Elijah remained patient, understanding that transformation takes time. He made sure to check in with each person, offering support and encouragement when needed. The most noticeable change came from the guests themselves. Word had spread that the restaurant was not just known for its food, but for the warmth of its service. Regulars who had been coming for years began noticing the difference, and new customers, curious about the buzz, started to walk through the doors. Elijah could see the impact as he watched guests smile at the staff, greeted with genuine warmth and a sense of belonging. No longer did anyone feel out of place or overlooked. Every visitor, no matter their background, was treated with the same level of respect. One afternoon, as Elijah walked through the dining room, he overheard a conversation at one of the tables. Two customers were chatting with the server, laughing and enjoying their meal. "You know, I've been coming here for years," one of them said, "but I've never seen it like this. There's something different about the place now. It feels more welcoming." Elijah smiled to himself. He had always known that people could feel the energy of a space, and it was clear that the changes had made a lasting impression. The restaurant had gone from just another dining establishment to a place where community and kindness were at its core. It was no longer just about serving food. It was about creating an experience that made people feel seen and appreciated. Ms. Johnson, too, noticed the shift. She had visited the restaurant several times since the incident, and every time, she could see how the staff interacted with the guests. There was a new energy in the air, one of genuine care. She was proud of Elijah, not just for his actions in the past few weeks, but for the way he had handled the situation with such integrity. "I knew you were capable of great things, Elijah," she told him one afternoon as they sat together in a quiet corner of the restaurant. "But what you've done here, with the staff, the guests, it's incredible. You've built something more than just a business. You've created a place where people feel like they belong." Elijah nodded, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without the team, Mom. They've really come together to make this place better." But as proud as he was of the progress, Elijah knew they couldn't stop there. There would always be room to grow, and he was committed to. As the restaurant's reputation continued to grow, it became clear that the changes were not only benefiting the guests, but the staff as well. Employees who had once felt disengaged began to take ownership of their roles. They saw how their work directly impacted the atmosphere, and as a result, they felt more motivated and fulfilled. It was no longer just about showing up for a paycheck. It was about making a difference in people's lives. One evening, Elijah stood at the front of the restaurant, looking around at the full dining room. The laughter and conversations filled the air, and he could see the genuine smiles on the faces of both the guests and the staff. It was a moment of pure contentment for him. He had built something that went beyond just a successful business. He had created a place where everyone, no matter who they were, could come and feel respected, valued, and heard. As the evening came to a close, Elijah took a moment to reflect on the journey. It had started with an unfortunate incident, a moment that could have easily been brushed aside. But instead of letting it fade into the background, Elijah had chosen to turn it into an opportunity for growth. He had learned that sometimes the greatest challenges led to the most significant changes, and in doing so, he had not only changed the direction of his restaurant, but had reinforced the values that mattered most: respect, kindness, and understanding. As the weeks passed, Elijah's restaurant flourished in ways he hadn't imagined. The improvements were clear not just in the feedback from customers, but in the daily interactions between the staff and guests. The atmosphere had transformed into something warm and welcoming, a place where every person felt valued and respected, no matter their background. Elijah knew that building this culture hadn't been easy, but it was worth every bit of effort. Ms. Johnson continued to visit the restaurant regularly, her pride in her son growing with each passing day. She'd noticed the subtle changes in the way the staff interacted with her, too. They no longer treated her as just another customer. They greeted her with smiles, engaging in pleasant conversations. It was a small gesture, but to her, it meant the world. She could see the difference in the way Elijah had shaped the team. They weren't just following orders anymore. They were genuinely trying to create an experience that made everyone feel like family. One evening, as Ms. Johnson sat with Elijah at a corner booth, sipping tea, she leaned back, a content smile on her face. "I don't think I've ever seen this place so alive," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "The energy here, it's different. People feel it." Elijah nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment settle in his chest. "I've worked hard to make sure everyone feels like they belong. It's not just about good food or great service anymore. It's about making people feel like they matter." His thoughts drifted to the incident that had sparked all of this change. It had been painful to watch his mother face that kind of disrespect, but now, looking at how far they had come, he knew it was a turning point in more ways than one. It had taught him a valuable lesson about leadership and the power of setting a positive example. As the dinner rush came to an end, the staff began to clean up and prepare for the next day. Elijah walked around, checking in with everyone. He noticed the energy was different than it had been in the past. People weren't just going through the motions. They were engaged, talking to one another, offering assistance without being asked. He realized that they had truly embraced the culture of respect he'd worked so hard to build. It wasn't just a policy anymore. It had become part of their daily lives. Later that evening, after the last customers had left and the staff had finished cleaning up, Elijah took a moment to stand in the middle of the restaurant. He looked around, taking in the quiet hum of the space that had once been filled with tension. Now it felt like home. He had built something lasting, something that was bigger than just a business. He had created a place where people came not just for a meal, but for an experience that made them feel seen, heard, and valued. As he made his way out the door, he saw Ms. Johnson waiting for him at the front. She was standing by the window, looking out at the street, a soft smile on her face. Elijah walked up beside her and wrapped his arm around her shoulder. "You've done a good job, Elijah," she said, her voice full of pride. "I always knew you could do something special." Elijah smiled, feeling the weight of her words. "I just want to make sure this place is more than just a restaurant. It's about creating a space where everyone, staff and guests alike, feels like they matter. I think we're getting there." They stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the quiet street. It had been a long journey, but Elijah knew it had been worth every step. What had started as a challenge had turned into something beautiful, a reflection of the values that had always mattered most to him. And as he looked at his mother, he realized that it wasn't just the restaurant that had changed. It was his whole perspective on leadership, community, and respect. "Let's go home, Mom," he said, his voice calm. "We've earned a little peace tonight." With one final glance at the restaurant, they walked out into the night, the city lights shining softly around them. The restaurant was in good hands, and Elijah knew that no matter what the future held, the lessons they had learned together would guide them every step of the way. And as they walked home side by side, both Elijah and Ms. Johnson knew that their bond had only grown stronger. It wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. It was about the foundation of respect, integrity, and love that they had built together. And that, they knew, was something worth protecting forever.